Once inside the young master's apartment, Lij thought Chairman B.M. Chu was not someone to ignore. When he first heard the chairman say to watch B.M. Taiha and report anything odd, Lij found it funny that such a strong man still wanted to control his son. He figured he'd do the job fast and easy, tell about the rich kid's silly acts and earn some good money. In the end, he'd rather handle a spoiled kid than a wild one. There's something weird about this guy. His actions are sometimes so strange, it's hard to trust your gut. Lij was sure that if he told the chairman about the young master's business, he might not live peacefully after. He didn't know whose rules to follow, stuck between father and son. Lij made sure B.M. Taiha didn't know he was watching for the chairman, so he stayed careful. He left the apartment as quietly as he came. When Nahai Jizu got home, she began sewing a heart on a teddy bear's chest. With each stitch, her heart grew full. She felt B.M. Taiha's place in her life was fixing her hurts, like a ripped doll with neat stitches. Bit by bit, his kind hands were healing her pain. Though she felt like a broken toy, knowing he cared to keep her safe warmed her heart and soul. Done, the girl held up the teddy bear to check her work. She was proud of it. Looking at it, she was amazed at how a needle and thread could bring so much happiness. Jizu thought it was cute and, worried she'd dirty it carrying it around, decided to ask B.M. Taiha to her house tomorrow after work to give it to him as a gift. She looked at the bear, sighed, and hoped he'd like it. Mitchell lay in bed with Ari asleep, thinking it had been days since he left home and Nahai Su hadn't called once. Honestly, he hoped she'd chase him right away. She always worried about him, even if she was still mad. Nahai Su was like that, always checking where he was, if he'd eaten, how he felt. It was natural for her. Mitchell thought he couldn't keep wearing the same stuff forever. Ari kept pushing him to get new things, but not to go back home. He figured she wasted more than Nahai, maybe because she was young. His ex-wife always fixed clothes and wore them. He decided he'd go home tomorrow to grab his things and check on Nahai. The next day, to her sadness, B.M. Taiha texted an apology for not meeting her after work. Nahai Su felt down, silly for hoping all day to see him. She replied that it was okay and looked forward to another day. She was so used to seeing him daily it felt normal. After all, he had his own life, so some days he couldn't come. She told herself it was fine. On her way home, Nahai realized it was the first time he'd texted he couldn't meet. She worried something bad happened. At that moment, B.M. Taiha with Lij reached the meeting spot. He was sure it'd be a fun night. Across town, Mel walked boldly to Nahai Su's worn-out apartment. He smirked, thinking she'd be thrilled to see him, and he could likely toy with her feelings again. Mitchell cautiously opened the door and saw what he expected to see. He was even relieved that nothing had changed since the night he'd left. Even though it was clean inside, his and Nahai Su's flat was still shabby. While the man was not at home, the girl continued to live in this flat. It seemed a matter of course. Suddenly his gaze fell on a table in the middle of the room. Mel picked up the teddy bear and looked at it. He never thought that Nahai Su liked stuffed animals. Then the man laughed, thinking that apparently the girl missed him so much that she bought herself a toy to hug. He thought it was kind of cute. He tossed the toy back and smugly thought she should have valued him while he was around. The man then headed to the wardrobe to retrieve some of his clothes, rather noting that Nahai Su had washed them and folded them up. Bioma, accompanied by Lee Jae, arrived at the family dinner. His older brother stood on the top floor, sipping wine and watching his brother. A nasty grin appeared on his handsome face. He threw the crystal glass and looked down carelessly. The glass flew a centimeter from B.M. Taiha's face and shattered right at his feet. The guy looked up at his brother nonchalantly. B.M. Taiha looked at his brother mockingly and asked how he was doing. He wasn't happy that his little brother didn't greet him properly and started saying mean things right away. Then he noticed that B.M. Taiha had grown even taller since their last meeting, and he had chosen a bodyguard to match. The young man started talking in a mocking manner about how the younger brother should have his legs cut so he could look his elders in the eye. B.M. Taiha looked down at him and replied that perhaps it was his brother who should mature. Bioma got angry while the young man innocently continued to ask why his older brother never grew taller again. He reminded his brother how he suffered with leg pains and cried every day. Bioma grinned contentedly and asked with fake sympathy, "Do you still cry every night?" No sooner had the older brother swung his arm than he was immediately caught and stopped by Lee Jae. Biom brought his face close to his brother's and spat out not to be happy for long. He promised to get to him and finish him off. Just like his mother, the guy looked at his older brother calmly and replied that he would look forward to it. Suddenly, one of the bodyguards announced that the chairman had arrived. Lee Jae removed his hands and released the elder master Bioma. He turned to him and said that he would remember his face and that he had better watch out on his way home at night. Beom Taiha, smiling, put his hand on Lee Jae's shoulder and said that he had to be careful now because his older brother was very vengeful. It sounded like a mockery. Soon the three men were seated at a large, beautifully set table. The elder brother was silently and thoughtfully picking at his plate when the chairman's voice rang out. The man wanted to know who a girl named Melissa was. The guy got nervous and said it was just a crazy girl from the other side of the world. He asked why his father was interested in her. The chairman didn't like that answer, and although he was calm on the outside, one look at him was enough to realize he was not to be messed with. Beom Taiha got even more nervous and blurted out that he had nothing to do with her child, that it was just a crazy girl who wanted to grab his money. He suggested that the father bring her to investigate her. The man continued to stare at his son as if he were a nobody and answered nothing. The guy swallowed hard and, grumbling to himself, apologized. Beom Taiha dined quietly as he listened to his brother apologize to his father for his rude behavior. He was about to sip wine from his glass when the chairman asked what about him. The man wanted to know if his son had any problems. The guy remembered Nahai Su, hesitated for a moment, and finally replied confidently that he was doing fine and that his father had nothing to worry about. Back home, Nahai Su saw Mitchell's shoes on the doorstep and her eyes glazed over with rage. She ran into the house, screaming his name. The man, as if nothing had happened, walked out of the room holding a bag of belongings. The girl started shouting at him, asking who he thought he was for breaking into her house. Mitchell smiled boldly and replied that the girl had made a very daring statement. After all, this was their shared home. Such calm and insolent behavior infuriated the girl even more. She thought, who the heck did he think he was? And answered rudely, "No, this is no longer our house. It's my house." She jumped on him with fists and screamed at him, asking how he had the nerve to come back after seducing a young girl. Mel intercepted her wrists and squeezed tightly. He smirked and asked who she thought was young. Ari was 25 years old and quite aware of what she was doing. Nahai Su tried to break free from his tight grip and continued to accuse the man of being irresponsible. She shouted that he should have avoided that girl, knowing the situation, and should have acted like an adult. Mel laughed, and then brought his face closer to the girl's face and slyly told her to admit that she was just jealous. There was panic and confusion in the girl's eyes. He mockingly whispered, "Is she upset that he cheated on her with a girl 8 years younger than her?" Nahai Su couldn't get over the shock of what that man was saying. Then the man lowered his hand and squeezed her rear, continuing to ask if maybe she was angry because she missed him. The girl's body felt like it was pricked with needles of disgust. She looked at her ex-husband and was convinced that he was a crazy jerk. She started throwing everything she could get her hands on at the man with unbelievable force and screamed at him to never touch her again and to get out of her home. Mitchell, pleased with this reaction, smilingly left the apartment and said they would see each other again. He liked the way she was hysterical and threw her fists at him like a real fighter. He walked out of the house, dancing and humming a little song to himself. The man was sure that since she'd left his things behind, it meant she was pretending not to be happy to see him. He was sure she missed him. He could even breathe easier because he saw Nahai Su's rage. She finally looked like a living person. Nahai Su stood in the middle of the apartment and breathed heavily. Her anger was slowly fading. The girl's body began to shiver and she weakened and fell to her knees. She surprised herself, but the first thing that came to mind was to pick up the phone and call a specific person. Finally, she heard a familiar voice on the other end of the phone. Bioma replied almost instantly, hearing the girl's voice. The guy immediately realized that something bad had happened. His eyes lit up with anger and a promise of revenge. Beom Taiha listened intently to the girl on the other end of the phone, and with every word she spoke, his expression grew gloomier. He was already halfway to her when she finished speaking. The guy sighed heavily. He'd expected something like this from her foolish ex-husband. He'd even considered murdering him. Lee Jae caught the young master's attention with his lively appearance. He asked him if he wanted him to stay with him today and help him hide someone's body. Biom looked at him thoughtfully, then grinned and calmly replied that it wasn't necessary for now. He thought about the fact that it wasn't time yet. He's going to let that scoundrel enjoy his supposed triumph, and then he'll make sure his end is as wretched as possible. Thinking about it, the guy stared out the car window in cold blood. Biom had too much liquor at dinner and tried to tidy himself up in the bathroom. The bodyguard asked if he was okay, to which the young man snapped and said that nothing was okay, that the dinner had been so dreadful that he didn't know whether he wanted to eat or puke more. The guy gazed at himself in the mirror, and at the memory of his brother and father, he shook with fury. He was repulsed at how much Biom Taiha tried to mimic their father. His manner of talking, eating, even his style of clothing, all copied from the chairman. His cheek muscles tensed. The bodyguard said the younger master left recently. Biom Taiha smiled wickedly and said that his younger brother had been acting all evening as if he was the chairman's only worthy heir, and as if he already had the whole family under his grip. The young man stared at himself in the mirror with a crazed look and vowed he wouldn't let his brother just escape with it. Nesu stood at the bus stop and looked at the cars passing by, absorbed in her thoughts. She did not immediately notice the tall figure that appeared beside her. "I'm sorry. I tried to get here as fast as possible. Did you wait long?" The girl heard a familiar voice and turned around to meet Biom Taiha's gaze. He was standing in front of her, so dressed up and attractive. She was a bit flustered looking at him. She couldn't even think of what to say at once. The girl recalled that he had texted her, saying he had important tasks to do that evening. Maybe he had a job meeting or something. The guy just smiled with his head tilted to the side and looked at her. Nesu started to apologize for pulling him away from his duties, but the guy just reached out his hand to her face, wrapped a loose strand of hair around his finger, and without letting her finish speaking, replied that she wasn't troubling him. Biom looked at her, still playing with her hair, and said, "Thank you for reaching out to me first." Still sitting in the car, the guy was thinking about the fact that it was hard for him to tell if the girl's shaky voice made him mad or sad, but one thing he knew for sure. Knowing that he was the first person she sought in a tough situation gave him a strange sense of contentment. Nesu looked down wearily and said that she had no one she could turn to, as she had no family or close pals, and recently no spouse either. After the words about her husband, the girl looked at the guy and saw that he was smiling slightly. She smiled back at him and said, "Just be my buddy for today." Biom Taiha looked at her, genuinely pleased that she needed him. His eyes were filled with warmth. Then he moved closer to the girl and asked slyly, "Do I get nothing in return?" Nesu felt uneasy at how close he stood beside her and looked at her expectantly. While the girl was seriously pondering how to thank him, not grasping the guy's vague hints, Biom stood like a cunning kitten waiting for praise. Suddenly, the girl started rummaging around in her coat pockets, and then she reached out and put something in the guy's palm and said in an apologetic tone that it was all she had. The guy froze in place, looking at the crumpled bills in his palm. Nesu apologized for taking up his time and told him to buy himself something tasty later. The young man couldn't decide whether to weep or chuckle. He wanted to flirt with her, but she took it all literally. At that moment, he felt ashamed of himself. The girl had already managed to get a short distance away when Biom Taiha called out to her and said that she couldn't just leave after she had just paid for him. She stared at him and wondered what he meant. The guy leaned toward her with a radiant smile and replied that she had just bought him for 2001, so she couldn't just abandon him like that. The owner of a roadside food stall was wearily stirring her food when she heard customers coming in. Looking up, she saw a young, pretty girl, and behind her an incredibly handsome man. The young folks greeted her in a friendly way when they entered. The shopkeeper said eagerly that they were so lovely that they looked like stars. Nesu was a bit shy. The girl was about to stay quiet, but the older woman kept admiring them and, saying that they didn't look like siblings, asked if they were a pair. The girl was flustered and rushed to protest. She said they were just good friends. Biom looked at the girl thoughtfully. He moved closer to the girl and put his hand on her shoulder. The gesture made her cheeks blush and sent shivers down her spine. She thought that perhaps her sudden reply had sounded a little rude and hurtful to him, but the guy leaned down to her, gave her a small hug, smiled at her in his youthful way, and said to the elderly lady in a bold manner, "I'm in one-sided love with her, so I'm the one pursuing her." He said it so lightly and sincerely that Nesu immediately flushed with embarrassment. She could only silently open her mouth in surprise. The woman sighed wistfully and said dreamily that this is the best time of a relationship. While Nesu was embarrassed and thinking of what to say, the guy continued to tease her and smiled sweetly. It was getting dark outside and it started to snow lightly. The young people were spending time in a small roadside tent. Nesu opened the bottle of soju and looked at the glass, thinking about how Kang Minchul always drank without any snacks when their lives became especially unbearable. For 13 years, their life had been full of struggles, and even in moments like this, the girl kept recalling her neglectful husband. She reached for the bottle to pour herself a glass, but Biom Taiha reached out and stopped her. He said he would pour the drink for her himself. "Last time it was cigarettes, today it's liquor," he said, as he poured the soju and sighed deeply. He kept his eyes on the girl and noticed that last time she looked as if she was about to cry, but today she looked only upset. Nesu confidently took the glass and said that he himself had told her that there were many nice things in the world, so she decided to try them. The guy rubbed his neck with his hand and replied that the nice things he suggested had nothing to do with what she was doing. When she grumbled and asked what kind of things he was talking about, the guy lowered his head even more, gave her a playful look, and stopped talking. He wondered if she was really so innocent that she was completely unaware of his hints. "If you keep asking, I might just want to tell you," he smirked at her and looked at her expectantly. For a moment, their gazes lingered on each other. The girl even opened her mouth a little as if she were about to ask something. The guy kept looking at her flirtatiously. Biom gently moved his foot so that it touched the girl's thigh. Suddenly the girl looked at him and said that looking at him, she couldn't help but think of Kang Minchul from the past. The guy thought for a moment and then grinned, asking if she meant to offend him in that way. The girl laughed, exhaled wearily, and replied fondly that it sounded like an insult now. But there had been a time when things had been different. There was a time when their days together were full of sparkle in their eyes, and those were wonderful times. Nesu was walking home when a guy approached her and said, "Hello." She looked at him in surprise as he introduced himself and said he lived close to her. The guy claimed he knew her and even knew where she lived. The girl didn't understand why he began talking to her. He handed her a roll and smiled, saying he'd bought it just for her. The girl stared confusedly at the roll. Seeing her doubts, the guy told her not to worry about the quality of the roll and to eat it calmly. Then he walked on, waved goodbye to her, and said they would meet again later. Nesu was left standing with the roll in her hands. She actually knew this boy. He lived atop a hill. He had no parents, and his grandmother had passed away early. At night, he often hung out with older boys. They smoked and drank in dark corners. It seemed like all the boys and girls knew him, and while you'd think he looked like a true troublemaker, he was actually a very kind-hearted guy. He often helped neighbors and had a charming personality. So many adults had a positive opinion of him. Since he was quite handsome, everyone around him agreed he was a great fellow. After that time, Mitchell began to meet the girl every day, and each time he brought her some sort of treat. Sometimes it was banana milk, and sometimes it was instant noodles. Each time, the girl didn't understand why he was doing all this, why he was giving her attention. One day, the guy couldn't take it anymore and asked why she never once asked anything about him. They'd been seeing each other daily for a month, but she never asked him a single question. He held out his phone to her and asked her to share her number. Mel teased her by saying he would cry loudly if she refused him. When he saw she was embarrassed, he said that if she didn't want to, she could say no. Nesu got nervous but replied that she wanted to give him her number, but she didn't own a phone. The guy was very shocked. It was odd that someone still didn't have a phone. Mitchell promised himself he'd earn money in a month and buy the girl a phone. He worked long and hard at a building site and even borrowed cash from a friend. Finally, after a month, he was able to purchase a phone, though not pricey, it was still a phone. He was very proud of himself and told the girl he wanted to give her something fancier, but it was better than nothing. Nesu was very thankful but asked why he did it, and Mitchell said he wanted to always stay in touch with her. The guy started teaching her how to use the phone and asked her to save his number. The girl just wrote his name, to which the guy playfully took offense, saying it looked too formal. He took the phone, added a heart emoji at the end of his name, and asked her not to change the contact. When she got home that same night, Nesu lay curled up in a ball and tried to block out the drunken yelling and cursing by covering her ears. The phone screen glowed, alerting her to a text message that had arrived. Mitchell sent her a smiley cat face. It looked so sweet. But in this situation, it felt so silly that the girl cried. There was no space for anything good in her life up to that point, so simple things like this gave her mixed emotions. Mitchell's school buddies began to notice that he had become distracted and was often late for classes. The guy proudly stated that the girl he likes has a class that starts 30 minutes later, so even though he gets scolded, he'll still be late because he has to walk her there. Friends were shocked and asked what would happen to Sangi. The boy stared at them blankly and asked who they were talking about. The guys replied that there was a girl named Sangi, and everyone knew she liked Mel a lot. They warned him to be cautious because this girl was very dangerous. She constantly bullied other girls, but Kang Mitchell said he didn't care and it wasn't his issue. Soon it was time for the exams. Nesu was very nervous and unsure of her skills. Mel, on the other hand, was calm. He was mostly hoping for good fortune. Later, sitting on the porch of the house, the guy asked the girl how her exams went, but, embarrassed, the girl said it was better if he didn't ask. Laughing and snatching the results sheet out of her hands, the guy said he wanted to check. Nesu pounced on him like a kitten trying to grab her papers back. Looking at her sheet, completely marked up in red pen, the guy joked that she didn't have a single right answer at all. The girl said that he had probably flunked it himself. The boy handed her his paper with only a few errors on it and asked if she didn't expect him to be so smart in his studies. Nesu stared at him in amazement. He really was very bright and talented, and it made her feel sad for him. It was such a shame that such a gifted boy was growing up without parents. Also, his grandparents had died early, and he was left all alone. It was a pity that none of his family could see how wonderful he was becoming. She kept thinking that this was a great loss. She felt sorry that such talent was going to waste. Everyone around him thought he was polite and nice, said he had no flaws, and wished him all the best. That's what everyone thought of him. But it was only years later that the girl realized it was all just pity. Everyone felt sorry for Kang Mitchell. Mitchell was just passing by with his pals when he noticed Nesu watching him and waved happily, calling her his wife. His friends started cheering and patting him on the shoulder, and the guy told them all to call her their sister-in-law. The guy began to greet her loudly. Nesu was stunned and burned with embarrassment. She wasn't even in a relationship with that guy. She shyly tucked a loose curl behind her ear and moved on. The girl was quietly walking down the street when suddenly someone shouted her name. It was a group of girls. One of them stepped forward and asked if she was Nahai Su. One of Mitchell's friends, who was passing by at that moment, saw the girls surround Nesu and take her somewhere else. The guy found Mel and asked if his girlfriend was friends with the girls from Sangan High School. He was surprised and said it couldn't be. Then his friend told him that he saw them take Nesu somewhere. Mitchell visibly tensed up and asked where exactly he had seen them. The girls dragged Nahu into the washroom, surrounded her, and insulted her, asking what kind of relationship she might have with Kang Mel. The frightened girl replied that there was nothing between them. Sangi leaned close to Nahu and said she would ruin her face so she could no longer flirt with boys. Nahu stared at her in horror, unable to believe what was happening. One of the girls was assigned to guard the entrance so they wouldn't be caught and punished. She was certain no one would come in, but suddenly Kang Mitchell appeared at the door. He pushed the door open with such strength that the guarding girl fell to her knees, her hands covering her head. The boy grabbed Sangi's arm with force and pushed her aside. He saw Nahu sitting on the floor in the corner. The girl was covered in scratches and her clothes were torn, so she had to shield her body with her hands. Her eyes were full of tears. Mel took off his shirt and draped it over her shoulders. He helped her stand and said he would walk her home. Sangi, in a fury, pulled out a small knife and threatened the boy that she would end him. The boy seized her arm and pressed the knife to his throat. He looked at her angrily and told her to try it. The girl didn't move. Late at night, Mitchell was helping Nahu get home, wrapped tightly in the boy's shirt. The girl wondered what would happen next. She was worried that these girls might be planning something against him. Mel hugged her and smiled brightly, asking if she really cared that much about him. Later, the boy had to face a group of older guys sent by those girls, and although he took a hard beating, he managed to defeat them too. Seeing Mitchell after the fight, Nahu was angry and sad at the same time. After all, he had promised her he wouldn't get hurt. The boy stood in front of her awkwardly, rubbing his neck covered in scrapes. He told the girl not to worry about him, boasting that he managed to beat those guys even though they attacked him together. Then he froze when he saw Nahu crying, her fists clenched tightly. He asked her to calm down, promising that next time he would fight fiercely and not take a hit. He even offered her to strike him if she wanted to. The boy took her hand, bringing it to his head, and froze when he heard the girl ask why he was treating her so kindly. Nahu stood with her head down and sniffed as she continued to ask why he was being so nice to her. She looked at him and saw his ears and cheeks redden. He asked shyly if she didn't realize why. Nahu saw in front of her the boy who she knew had charmed girls' hearts many times, and now he stood blushing in front of her, his hands shaking. She reached up and wrapped her arms around his neck. They were both young, but their youth had been full of roughness and fights. The girl kissed him and was ready to burn to ashes in that vivid, raw youth that night. After they both burned in that flame, Mitchell vanished like smoke and Nahu was left as ashes. Memories consumed the girl and she drank another shot of soju. Bioma watched her closely. Nahu asked why he was staring so intently, as if he'd never seen people drink before. The boy admitted that he was jealous of her. She sat next to him and drank, but her thoughts were filled with another man. It hurt. While she held the glass sadly and quietly, the boy thought about whether he could ever win, what he had to do to overcome her memories that he could neither destroy nor erase. Nahu muttered that he was just a flirt. She said that when he says things like that with his handsome face, girls probably fall in love with him instantly. Bioma looked at the girl carefully and grinned. "You didn't fall for it," he said. She replied that it was because she knew everything, but the boy said it seemed like she didn't know anything. Nahu told him not to interrupt the grown-ups, to which the boy laughed and said he was an adult too. Then the girl looked at him and asked, "Honestly, tell me, how old are you?" Bioma leaned toward the girl, put his hand on her arm, and pulled her closer. His breath tickled her ear, and he whispered softly, "I'm 23. He bit his lower lip, holding back a laugh, while the girl turned away in embarrassment and began coughing. Nahu thought she was going crazy. She realized, of course, that he was younger than her, and even though he looked so very attractive and was more mature for his age, he was still 10 years younger than her. The girl couldn't stop coughing, so she grabbed a bottle of soju and drank it straight from the bottle. The boy stared at her in surprise. He propped his head up with his hand and smiled, saying that apparently Auntie was already drunk. The girl hiccuped, lowered her head, and mumbled that she wasn't drunk at all. Seeing that she might fall, Bioma reached out and placed her head on his shoulder. Nahu felt how warm and strong he was, and when she opened her eyes, she admitted that no matter how much she thought of him, he was still too young. Hearing those words, the boy smiled. On a drunken mind, the girl was saying funny things. He leaned down to her and asked, "Aren't you happy to win?" Nahu raised a confused gaze, and their eyes met. The girl blushed at the sight of his face so close to hers. The boy kept smiling charmingly and said that her ex was sleeping with a girl 8 years younger than him, and he was even younger than her, so she should be happy about it. The girl continued to drown in his eyes, while Bioma said that she must be terribly angry and wanted to take revenge on her ex-husband. "Then it's okay to use me," the boy offered. For a moment, bold thoughts flashed through the girl's mind, but then she froze with shock. The girl jumped up from her seat and said she wanted to leave. She couldn't do that, he was too good a boy for her. Bioma walked quietly behind the girl while she swayed along the road. Noticing that she was off course, the boy gently took her by the shoulders and told her that her house was in the other direction. A slight smile played across his face, but suddenly Nahu clung to him and rested her head on his chest, saying she didn't want to go home. The boy froze. He wrapped his arm around her waist, holding her up and keeping her from falling. She was so warm and soft. Swallowing, the boy said, "That's a bit dangerous to say." Nahu pressed her back against him, feeling his firm, warm chest. His hand gently held her under her chest, but at the same time sent shivers all over her body. The girl sighed, and the boy asked if she wanted him to stay with her. "You look completely charming," the girl replied. Bioma continued to hug her. When he heard this, he grinned and said that because of the alcohol, the girl didn't filter what she said. But she protested and said that she had always had that opinion of him, he just didn't know it. The boy smiled, and with a chuckle replied that earlier she had said he was too young for her. Nahu turned around in his arms and told him to stop acting like a grown-up in front of her. The girl grabbed him by the arms and started scolding him for acting like that, saying that if he teased her, telling her to take advantage of him, she would punish him. To be taller and see him better, she stood on the toes of his shoes. Bioma was amused by the situation. He enjoyed teasing her and how open she became after drinking. He smiled playfully at her, looked her in the eye, and challenged her. "Go ahead, try it." Nahu pulled his sleeves down while stretching out on her toes. She pressed her chest against his, feeling her heart race and pleasure flow through her veins. Exhaling, she whispered softly, "Come here. Lower your head more." She pulled him by the lapels of his coat and reached for him with her lips. The boy kept smiling, not taking the situation seriously because she was barely on her feet. He thought about how funny she was, but suddenly the blood pulsing in his ears roared. Bioma could feel his heart beating against his chest, and his lips were captured. This small, fragile woman pressed her body against him and kissed him. She took over his whole world. Bioma froze in shock when he felt soft, warm lips on his mouth. He hadn't expected the girl to do something like this. Breathing heavily, the girl trembled briefly and then kissed him again, her heart beat like a moth that was glad to flutter into the light. She continued to grip him by the lapels of his coat and lowered her head, trying to catch her breath. The boy kept staring at her, trying to decide what to do. Nahu declared that she said she would do it and did it. It seemed like she was attempting to prove something to herself rather than to him. The girl poked her finger at his chest and glared at him with a burning face of embarrassment, telling him not to quarrel with her anymore. The moment their eyes locked, something clicked in Bioma's mind. He reached out his hands and wrapped them around the back of the girl's head, pulling his face closer. She tried to say that she had more life knowledge, but the boy didn't let her finish. He tilted her head slightly and pressed his lips into hers in a hungry kiss. At that moment, his body was as if struck by lightning. He ran his fingers through her hair and began to move in sync with her. Nahu felt his tongue slip into her mouth, and then he took her face in his hands and started kissing her as if he was searching for rescue in her. She closed her eyes and surrendered to the passion. The girl's legs shook. The boy was kissing her very expertly, and she was leaning toward him closer and closer. She stood up on her toes to kiss him even harder, but suddenly felt her body spinning. Bioma turned her around, pressing her tight to him. He wrapped one arm around her waist and hugged her firmly, and with the other hand, he gently held her neck, leaning over her and making the kiss even deeper. He could hear her moaning and feel her pressed against him, but he continued to taste her softly. The girl's mind was almost completely fogged. She tried to remember to breathe. They pulled away from each other for a moment to gulp in air. Nahu instantly felt the chill prickling her lips and reached for the boy to restart the kiss. Then suddenly she started breathing heavily and said they had to stop. Bioma's gaze became serious and blank. The girl lowered her flushed face to his chest and, with gasping breaths, tried to say she couldn't breathe. She rubbed her cheek against his firm chest and admitted that he was the reason she couldn't think clearly. Then suddenly, panic hit her so hard that the girl felt she was losing awareness. Bioma picked her up and held her gently in his arms. He looked at the unconscious girl and tried to make a choice. He walked with her in his arms through the hotel lobby like she was light as a feather, strolling up to the front desk. The boy casually asked for a room. Nahu was sniffling and groaning heavily at the same time. The porter and clerk began to watch the young man with curiosity. At first they thought it was the chairman himself, but on closer look, they realized it was his son, who looked like 2 drops of water. One of the men assumed it was the eldest son of the Bayam family who brings new girls to his room every day, but the porter said it was the wrong son, the one about whom the nasty rumors had been spreading. He saw him quite often in the company of various girls. One could recognize him as a typical member of the CHS at a glance. At the time, he thought that the boy looked like the chairman, like 2 drops of water, but now, looking at this son, he was even spooked by how much more he resembled his father. It's like he's a perfect copy of him. Biomi was having fun with another girl at the time. He paused for a moment and scratched his ears, saying that someone was chatting about him. The girl began to complain unhappily because he had stopped. She licked her lips and pulled down the straps of her dress, wondering if he was able to take his eyes off her. The young man quickly returned his focus to her and replied that he was unable to pull himself away from her. He kissed the girl and said he didn't have the patience for a hotel and that they would do it right here. The spacious room was dark and quiet. Bioma gently laid Nahu on the bed. He sat down by the bed and carefully removed the shoes from the girl's feet. He couldn't put her to bed with her shoes on. He wanted her to rest in comfort. The boy thought about their kiss and what she had said to him. It would have been simple to take advantage of the situation, but he didn't want to. He convinced himself to be patient and wait for her quietly. After handling the shoes, he lifted the girl up to take off her coat. Nahu was almost completely unaware, only mumbling softly. Bioma tried to act cautiously so as not to startle her. All the while he was thinking that he wanted the girl to be completely relaxed. Nahu turned her head in his direction and pressed her cheek against his shoulder. The boy froze, gazing closely at her face. He smiled, watching her snuggle up to him in her sleep as if seeking safety. It was like she trusted him quite a bit already. He gently tucked her back into bed and whispered sweet dreams to her. She would definitely be hungover tomorrow, so he didn't want to disturb her any further. Bioma covered her with a blanket and patted her. He was about to take his hand away when the girl instinctively reached for him and wouldn't let him go. The boy propped himself up on the bed, hovering over her, and again convinced himself to stay calm. His heart was pounding, and he desperately wanted to undress for this girl, but he had to wait. He stood up and took a few steps toward the exit when he heard the girl's quiet sobs. The boy came back and stroked her head, whispering that she was going to be okay. He crouched on the edge of the bed and continued to pat her and calm her until the girl's breathing steadied. Nesu sighed happily. She felt her body sinking into something soft and cozy. Usually she woke up with a breeze chilling her body and her muscles aching, but today she felt very snug. She turned over quickly and opened her eyes, trying to sharpen her focus. The girl sat up on the bed and looked around, attempting to understand where she was. Clearly, she didn't recognize this place and couldn't recall how she'd arrived here. Then the events of last night started to return to her mind. The last thing she remembered was a fiery kiss with Bam Taiha. From the realization of what had occurred, the girl leaped up like a startled kitten. Her face instantly glowed with embarrassment. She pressed her palm to her burning cheek and convinced herself that it must have been a dream, just like last time. She'd been having many dreams like this lately because of this man. Nesu scanned the room, and it wasn't difficult for her to believe it was a dream. Her shoes were tidily arranged, her coat was carefully hung, and her purse was neatly placed on the nightstand. But she clearly recalled the slow and tender touch of someone who had looked after her when she was tipsy. She checked herself in a panic to ensure her undergarments were still on. She felt like nothing had happened to her that night. Nesu hid her face in shame and thought that, although she was relieved nothing had occurred, wasn't it too late to fret about such things now? She shouldn't have crossed that boundary, but his actions, which seemed to invite her to cross it, excited her so much. His always smug and calm look, which the girl couldn't resist, made her want to nip his lip hard enough to sting him. But at the end of the day, she didn't need to be dramatic. They didn't sleep together, so it's hardly worth making a fuss about. Nesu began to slip on her shoes and caught herself jealously thinking that this was probably not the first time for him. With his attractive face, it would be foolish to think he didn't have a history. She blushed and admitted to herself that he proved to be quite talented. Putting on her coat, the girl scolded herself for being such a careless grown-up and thinking silly things. She should definitely say sorry to him. When she reached into her pocket, she found a note. Ensuring the girl was resting peacefully, Bam decided to write a note for her. He was certain that when she woke up, she might be scared to find herself in an unfamiliar place. He wrote that she was too intoxicated to be taken to her home, so he apologized for bringing her to the hotel and hoped she would forgive him. He also asked her not to worry about paying for the room. To the girl, he wrote that he had a free voucher he planned to use when he got a partner. In truth, the hotel was owned by his family, and the entire crew escorted him to his car. Lee Jae gave a curious smile and asked the young master if he really needed the extra security of the house. He was surprised by the additional shift and asked if the man thought someone would crash through a window in a skyscraper in downtown Seoul to attack him with a blade. Bam laughed and asked the young man to amuse him with something. Lee Jae asked if the man was going to meet that girl today. Bam Taiha grinned and replied that he wasn't going to be the first to reach out to her today. He smirked strangely and said that her debt to him had increased, so she should be the first to contact him. In that case, maybe he'd be in the mood to let it slide. Lee Jae looked at the man like he was nuts and couldn't grasp what he was mumbling about. He couldn't figure out what the man was thinking lately. He followed him last night and saw him enter the hotel with the girl in his arms and then leave with the hotel staff. Now he couldn't tell if this man wanted to avoid being noticed or if he was eager to be discovered. Taking a puff on his cigarette, Lee Jae wondered whose discovery would be scarier, that girl's or the chairman's. Mel and Heejee were lying in bed chatting about nothing. Suddenly, the girl playfully pouted her lips and declared that it wasn't fair that the man was so skilled in various areas. She said it seemed like he'd dated many women, and his ex-wife was even fixated on him. She asked if it was because he was good at it or because he was impressive. The man grinned smugly. Noticing his reaction, the girl enviously said that he probably didn't mess up his first time either. Mel smirked and looked at the girl, thinking how innocent she was. Did she really think he was like that when he was younger? He put his arm around her and kindly replied that it was because he was older than her. Heejee asked if that's what happens when you get older. The man replied vaguely. Mel recalled the start of his and Nesu's story and said that as people age, they stop being as foolish and naive as they were when they were young. He remembered the first time she had kissed him, how childish they really were and how frightened he'd been of it. The man turned her back to him so she couldn't see his embarrassed, reddened face. He told the girl to go home. She asked him if he liked the kiss and why he was sending her away so suddenly. The man was struggling to hold back and trying to catch his breath. He said his body was sore from the fight and Nesu offered to give him medicine, but the man panicked and asked her not to turn around and look at him. Eventually, he quickly turned around and said he was going home first. The girl stared after him and didn't know what to do or say. Mel, on the other hand, was trying to catch his breath and calm his wildly beating heart. He couldn't believe that this girl had stirred up such a whirlwind of feelings in him. Heejee, seeing how foolishly the man was smiling, asked what he was thinking. She wondered if he was thinking about his first love. Mel exhaled and said he wasn't thinking about anything significant. Nesu decided to tidy the house and get rid of all unneeded things since she was no longer going to live with Mel. She decided to pack up all his belongings. She disposed of most of her items easily, but looking at some of them brought back memories. Even then, she didn't shed a tear, for she had promised herself she would never cry again. The girl decided that she would never cry for this man again and let go of all their memories together. Finished, the girl sighed in relief and stretched her stiff shoulders. She felt as if she had moved into a new home. She remembered that it's customary to eat jjajangmyeon when moving. She and Mel had eaten this dish on moving day. Nesu smiled at this memory and realized that she felt an unusual lightness, as if she had shed something very heavy in her life. Now the house was clean and empty, with no one to even eat with, but it made the girl realize how little space she had before in their already small apartment. The girl decided to throw out all her old undergarments at the same time. Even though she no longer lived with Mel, the poverty that had haunted her for the past 13 years would stay with her, but she would buy new undergarments to fill the emptiness in her heart. Glancing at the teddy bear she had so carefully embroidered the heart on, the girl thought she might find room in her heart for something else. She immediately thought of calling Bom and asking him to eat jjajangmyeon together. The man was sitting with Lee Jae playing jjajangmyeon, trying to pass the time. Suddenly, the screen of his phone lit up and a ringtone echoed through the room. Bom took the phone in his hands and smiled happily. Nahu went shopping for the first time in her life. She decided to purchase something new for herself. Before that, she was always given old and used items, so if she had something of her own, she'd cling to it and consider it her treasure. The most stunning event that ever occurred in her life was Kang Mitchell, but he vanished from her life so easily as if he had never been hers from the start. The girl paused at a clothing stall and began browsing. Upon noticing her, the friendly saleswoman immediately started offering her goods. She asked what Nahu was seeking, and Nahu Su replied she was searching for simple lingerie. The woman praised her lovely figure, and the girl flushed with shyness. The saleswoman began selecting various bras and presenting them to the girl. Finally, grinning, she pulled out a red lace bra and, smiling, said that in this, a girl would make her spouse wild. Nahu was trembling with embarrassment, looking for something completely plain. Then the woman handed her a classic white bra that pleased the girl. She inquired if Nahu Su had a boyfriend or husband. Smiling, the girl casually answered that she was single. Hearing this, the kind saleswoman packed her a red lace thong in a separate bag, saying it was a present and that such a young lady should wear pretty underwear. Nisu, who had never worn anything like this in her life, clutched the shopping bags to her chest. Even though she was shy, she was proud that she had bought something for herself for the first time. After that, the girl was delighted to find that spending money on small items was very fulfilling. She purchased a beautiful box for the bear she was going to give to Bioma. She also bought cozy socks for herself. She walked and hummed a little tune to herself, pleased with herself. Thinking about the guy, the girl suddenly recalled one very important detail. He often wore gloves, but they didn't seem warm at all. Then her gaze fell on a pair of warm, knitted mittens. She didn't hesitate to buy them for the guy, packing them in a separate bag. The satisfied girl continued on her way. She received a message from Bom Taiha saying that he had already arrived at the spot. She looked around, but it was hard to see anything in the crowded marketplace. Then suddenly, she saw him, tall and handsome. He stood surrounded by local women vendors. Women gathered around him and asked if he was a model. They praised their familiar girls and daughters to him, hoping he would want to meet them. But when Bom Tai-ha saw the girl out of the corner of his eye, he smiled and said that he already had a partner. Finally meeting the guy's gaze, Nahusu froze, a little shy after what happened yesterday. Then she approached him and, smiling, thanked him for coming to her so quickly. Bom Tai-ha reached for her bags and replied that he was getting very curious. The girl thought he was about to start a discussion about what had occurred, and she began to think frantically about what to say to him and how he would react. Bom Tai-ha took the packets from her hands and, smiling, asked why she had called him today. The girl was shy and said she wanted to eat jjajang with sweet and sour pork, but she didn't want to do it alone, so she wanted to invite him over. Soon they were in a restaurant and sat in awkward silence. Nisu sipped water while waiting for their order and thought about how she seemed like a bold auntie who made all the first moves toward a guy and then treated him to food as an apology. When the food was ready, the girl said he should definitely try it because this place serves the tastiest jjajang. The guy asked if she visits here often. Quicker than she realized, she answered that she'd been here with Mitchell and then said she'd been here a couple of times herself. She felt very embarrassed that she had mentioned her ex in front of him. As she ate, the girl thought about how awkward it was to mention her former husband in front of the guy she'd kissed, even if drunk. It was wrong. Then she glanced at the guy and wondered how he could stay so calm and relaxed, as if nothing had happened between them yesterday. Taiha was quietly eating and kept a friendly expression on his face without pressuring her to talk. The girl thought that it probably didn't matter much to him because with his looks he likely had many girls, so he preferred to act as if a drunken mistake like that didn't happen. Nahu decided to relax and just enjoy the meal. As they neared the house, the girl thanked the guy for spending time with her and walking her home. She also thanked him for coming yesterday when she called him, even though he had his own matters to attend to. The girl lowered her head and said she had something else to say. She gathered the courage to look him in the eye and told him she was sorry for what she had done yesterday. She was drunk, and she shouldn't have acted like that. Suddenly, the guy abruptly brought his face close to hers and interrupted her, saying that he didn't need her apology. When she felt his breath on her face, the girl froze. Taiha looked into her eyes. Their faces were so close that he could brush his nose against hers. He was serious and said she didn't have to apologize because he enjoyed it so much. The guy asked if she didn't like it. The girl blushed, turned her face away, and replied that it wasn't that. Her heart raced, and her mind flashed again with naughty thoughts. That answer pleased Taiha. He thought that at least she was being honest with herself. He turned his head to catch her gaze again and said it was fine, that she could use him if she wanted to. Then he smiled flirtatiously. The guy reached for her hand, continuing to say that if her heart wasn't ready to accept him yet, she could use his body for now. Hearing such a bold offer, Nahusu, hiding her red face, shoved the gift bag into his hand and turned around abruptly, running home before the guy embarrassed her further. She shouted that it was a Christmas present and asked him to open it at home. Taiha smiled merrily, enjoying how cute she was, embarrassed and running away from him. He shouted after her, asking if he could go to her house and open the present, to which the girl told him to go home. Once home, the girl leaned her back against the wall, burning with shame. She thought of the guy pretending to be innocent but acting like a total expert. What was he thinking, trying to get into her house? Nahu pressed her hand to her mouth, imagining all sorts of naughty things he could think of. The nervous girl then stood up and decided she should take a shower and calm down. After getting out of the shower, the girl decided to put on new underwear. As it was cold in the flat, she looked for the laundry bag and sat down in front of the brown paper bag. Suddenly, she froze in shock. She remembered clearly that the nice shop assistant had put the underwear in a red bag, and the mittens were in a brown one. Now she was looking at the very same brown bag. Once in his flat, Taiha pulled a teddy bear with an embroidered heart out of a box. Intrigued by the next gift, the guy picked up a red paper bag and dipped his hand into it. At this moment, realizing her terrible mistake, Nahusu screamed in horror in her flat. The original plan was to give Beomtha a teddy bear with an embroidered heart and a pair of cozy mittens, but in reality the guy received a bag of her undergarments. The girl had never felt such embarrassment before. She grabbed her phone and dialed him, nervously biting the tip of her finger as she waited for a response, her mind racing with the thought that if he'd been home and opened the package, he'd likely have called her. She hoped he hadn't seen the contents yet. Beom collapsed on the couch and answered the phone. His voice was low and hoarse. Hearing his tone, the girl asked hopefully if he had already gotten home and had time to check his gift. The guy replied that he was already home but hadn't looked in the bag yet. She sighed with relief and admitted that she had accidentally given him the wrong bag and begged him not to peek inside. Beomtha covered his eyes with his hand, as if she could see him and catch him in a fib. He swallowed hard and asked why he shouldn't do it. The girl stuttered and said that there was something so frightening in there that he might have bad dreams again. She calmly repeated to him not to open the bag. She thought it was odd that his voice was hoarse and his breathing sounded as if he had a cold. Then the guy said he'd return it to her tomorrow morning, and they said goodbye. Nesu breathed a sigh of ease. Beomtha slowly took the phone away from his ear and lowered his hand to the sofa. His face was burning. Who would have guessed it? Now, thanks to chance, he had something to ponder. It was quiet in the dimness of the room. Only the soft breathing of the two could be heard. On the girl's neck and shoulders there were already a cluster of fresh marks left by Beomtha. Soon she was gazing down at him in expectation. At the sight of her, a cold fire burned in his eyes, which flared up with quick speed. The guy slowly gripped a small piece of fabric between his teeth. Nahaisu jolted up abruptly, waking up and trying to regain her senses. She turned around and, clutching the pillow, groaned. She was definitely starting to lose her wits. Both never slept a wink until morning, but neither of them suspected it or the reason for their sleeplessness. The girl decided that, even though it was still early, she would get ready for work. After showering and dressing, she heard the doorbell ring. Biom stood at the door of the girl's house and tucked his nose in the high collar of his sweater against the chill. The girl looked out and saw him. As promised, he had come early in the morning to swap packages. The guy held out the red, unlucky bag to her. In exchange, the girl shyly handed over another one and said it was his real present. She apologized for troubling him, but he smiled mysteriously and replied that it was okay. She looked at him and thought that, even though he was smiling, he seemed strange. Nahai asked if he was ill, to which the guy said he wasn't. She pressed and asked if he was weary, and he grinned and said he was captivated. He leaned down to her and told her that last night he couldn't sleep a bit at all. The girl looked away, flustered, and said she hadn't rested well either. She said it was probably because of the cold. There was an awkward pause between them for a moment. Then the girl muttered that she had to pack up and head to work. She had already turned toward the house when she felt a gentle pull on her coat. "I also brought you a gift. Go inside and open it." Biom handed the black bag to the surprised girl. Once at home, Nesu opened the bag and pulled out a lovely, soft sweater. Her eyes sparkled with joy. She immediately put it on and was amazed that it fit her perfectly. The girl was thrilled about the gift, sincerely like a kid. It was very warm and clearly not cheap. She decided that she would thank the guy again when she saw him. Soon she strolled into the flower shop and greeted her coworker brightly. Despite the icy weather, spring bloomed in her heart. Hang yawned and was about to greet the girl when she suddenly noticed her in her new outfit. She immediately praised Nesu and said that she looked fantastic. The girl thanked her cheerfully and said that it was a gift. Hang said that she used to be shy to mention, but because the girl wore the same clothes every day, she looked worn out. Now she looks very pretty. Nahai Su was embarrassed. The happiness of the gift faded. She wondered if Biom had given her a sweater because she looked shabby and pitiful in her old clothes. Ha Jiang, meanwhile, went on to say that her husband must have good taste. Nesu stared at her, and the girl said that since it was a gift, it must have been from her spouse, or was she mistaken? Nahai Su lowered her head and hesitantly admitted that she had actually recently gotten divorced. Pang was shocked and asked why it happened so suddenly and why the girl didn't say anything earlier. Nahai Su left to change her clothes and on the way tossed back that it was just the situation. The girl stood there and looked suspiciously at her. She thought it all seemed rather odd. Shortly after the shop opened, their regular handsome customer showed up. As usual, he and Nahai chatted nicely while the girl picked the bouquet of roses for him. Hajang watched with envy and confusion as the guy flirted with Nahai Su, and just as strangely, the girl encouraged him. Biom was genuinely smiling and joking with the girl while she was fulfilling his order. It was clear from the outside that the two were quite close. The moment he gently brushed Nahai Su's hand with his, Hajang thought she had lost her mind. She couldn't believe that a handsome man like him would be wooing an older woman like her. It's not known if she's really divorced or not. It didn't make sense and looked weird. So the girl stepped out from behind the counter, walked over to the guy, and tugged at his coat. She asked the guy for a few minutes. Biom Tai looked at the girl dismissively.